Welcome back, everyone. All right. He's an entrepreneur, an athlete, a dad, and possibly resonates with the title The Littlest Hobo. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thanks, Julie. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm super excited about our conversation. As I alluded to before the break, this gentleman has a lot going on, most of the time, I would argue. But, Jeff, what do you think the listeners need to know about you? Who are you?
I mean, that's a great question, and it's certainly a journey that I'm, trying to figure out, myself. I don't think it's a static question. I think it's always changing. The one thing that is certain, I believe, in life is change. But I mean, here's kind of what's happened, or what I can share, with you today. I'm a twin. So I've got a twin brother, and we're adopted. And so one of the things I constantly think about is just through my journey is attachment and how that has impacted me growing up. But I was my brother and I were picked by wonderful parents. So I had a really good upbringing, very nurturing upbringing. We've got a sister as well who lives in Australia, but we grew up in this very conventional, life, very safe environment, um, and I think that really shaped, kind of who I am, who I was, for the first 25 years of my life. School was preached all the time. We played a lot of sports. My brother and I were always doing something. We've always been very active, but there's also been a lot of energy that has to be that's had to have been kind of managed and tapered and channeled properly, because we were often very competitive with each other. And so one of the things that I'm aware of is that you know we were often pitted against each other, for mom and dad's affection, or at least that was my perception. And so it really kind of cultivated this really competitive edge. And even to this day, I mean, my brother and I push each other, to the limits. I do, endurance events. He does like bodybuilding. So we're almost 48 years old, and we're still pushing each other in different directions. But it's been very good to have that, in my life. Very achievement orientated. Uh, both my parents, my mom was a teacher, my father was an engineer, and both very competitive. And so my brother and I were also latchkey kids. So both parents were working, so we didn't have a mother at home kind of nurturing the family. I remember my mom, you're running out the door, at 6 a.m., 7 a.m. My brother and I would go to school. We'd have the little keys on our like shoelace with a key, and we'd come home and come home for lunch, and we'd make soup. Like, this is like grade two, so what are you, 7, 8 years old? I remember we were coming home from school one day, and these guys, these older kids were stealing our bikes out of the backyard, and we watched them steal our bikes and go down the lane on these bikes. And it never dawned on me to go in the house and call mom and dad. I went in the house, I was like grade two, and called 911, called the cops. And these cops show up, and my brother and I hop into the back of a cop car, and we're like, chase those guys down. And we, it had just rained, so that these guys had gone through all the different puddles in town. And so we literally just followed the tire tracks, and basically found these guys. They were, we ended up tracking them down to London Drugs in Edmonton, and they were stealing glue and chocolate bars, but we got our bikes back. And we just kind of cycled back home and told our parents, and mom and dad are just like, what the heck is going on? Right? Like, this is like, and you think about your kids now. Like, I've got two kids. I've got a son adopted who's now 25, and a daughter who lives with her mom in the Philippines who's 15. And I can't think of, like, we never um, put any kind of expectation on them, at 6, 7 years old. I think that's kind of how culturally we've just changed as a culture. We sometimes overly protect our kids now. But I certainly think that has impacted me in my life in terms of, being able to kind of get out there, being very independent. But at the same time, I was married to, someone from the Philippines for 15 years who brought this very interdependent, mindset. So while I understand, but there's this, so I mean, I struggle, with this independence, but also being interdependent from this experience. And so I'm trying to find the balance in terms of, what does that mean in terms of, my tribe? What do I need to function effectively? But how do I execute on my independence? And so all of it has really gotten me to today, whereby, I've kind of gone away from convention in terms of what a typical North American lifestyle looks like. And I've gone to something that looks just a little bit, unconventional. I live in a van, probably 150 out of 50 days out of the year. I spend a lot of my time, in nature, mountain biking. But then I'm also well educated. So I've got a good job, and I work remotely as a consultant. I've built a business over the last 2, 3 years that has enabled this lifestyle, but all of it comes from, initially this very conventional upbringing, getting my education, working good jobs for a number of years, getting married, doing all the things that, convention kind of says you need to do or should do. And then I've got this rebel tendency, this tendency that resists all this. And so maybe this is my way of addressing convention, or a bit of a rebellion in my way is to kind of do things a little bit differently. So I remember a comment. We used to watch American Idol all the time, as a family. And I remember Steven Tyler being on American Idol, and I'll never forget something that he said. He said, "You wouldn't believe how expensive it is to look this cheap." And of course, when I tell people that I live in a van, they immediately think of like a white panel van and this guy, like driving like the streets, school
Pictured a
zones,
shaggin'
and
wagon
right,
under the bridge.
exactly. I used to have a station wagon with
A shaggin' wagon.
a shaggin' wagon with wood siding. It was like a Vista Cruiser, amazing vehicle. You don't even see those on the roads anymore.
No, you do not. Um,
No.
so before we got on here, Jeff did warn me that I'd need to stop him because he would just go on. But I got to tell you, I loved that story. It was not the story I was expecting. I was expecting like I'm, a consultant and I'm this and I'm so. Thank you very much for sharing that. That was brilliant. And there's so much content in what you just said that I don't even know where to begin, but why don't we begin at the beginning? So I love the slant. I speak to a lot of people, and a lot of the people that I speak to and end up in my world just happen to be adopted. And very seldom do I feel or hear the energy that I was picked, I was chosen. And I love that because that is 100% true for, I would say, all adopted children, because you don't get adopted if you're not chosen or picked, but a lot of the energy around that is the opposite of, it's the end of the I was given up. And like, brilliant. And I love that you have the energy around that, that you do. And interestingly enough, I literally did a Facebook Live earlier today on the day of this recording, talking about where we got our motivation from. And just listening to you talk about how your brother and you are very competitive, and, because arguably same genetics, twins, of course, that just makes sense that you would be competitive. And how would you even, like, it just seems like such an even playing field. It's not like you're saying, well, that person's older or that person's, whatever the case may be, right? I love that. Um, what else I also love your story about the police, about the bikes being stolen, because there is so much about that story. You being in grade 2 and calling the police. Uh, First of all, most kids today at any age wouldn't notice that their bikes got stolen because they'd have their face buried in an electronic. They wouldn't
Yeah.
actually be looking to see if their bike was still there. That may or may not be judgment, but it's probably true. And the police would never come.
They'd never come. That's right.
That in itself is the funniest part of this story, is that the
Right.
police came and they
Totally.
they put these 2 young kids in the back of a cruiser to go on a high-speed chase that was probably 20 kilometers an hour. I freaking love that story. So, thank you so much for sharing that. I hope everybody else enjoyed it, as well.
Wait,
So
I was going to say, what's interesting with my daughter. So I talk to my daughter every week. Like I said, she lives in the Philippines. We'll talk, FaceTime or Instagram Messenger or whatever. Um, she has so much knowledge. Like the kids today have so much knowledge about the world.
Mm.
What's different though is that that knowledge is not applied. And I would, I worked in the Middle East. So part of my story is I've worked in the Middle East for over 15 years, 2 different occasions, once in Qatar for 11 years, and then Abu Dhabi for another 3 years. You would see people from certain countries, certain nationalities. It's not important what nationalities they are, but they grow up in a caste system, and they grow up with kind of a rote learning style. And so they're very good at giving you the book of information. But when it comes to applying critically what you've learned in a dynamic environment, they often fall flat. Now, over time, they can get that from experience. But this is kind of what I noticed with my daughter is that, like, I mean, I'll send her classical music playlists, and she's like, "Yeah, Dad, I've heard all that." I'm like, "Really? Like you've heard Bach and Beethoven and Mozart?" And she's like, "Yeah, and here's some other people that I've picked up on as well." And I'm just like blown away.
right.
But I always think about to myself, well, how are you applying that information, ultimately to get what you want in life, to be better, to, are you experiencing the world in a way that's going to be meaningful for you?
I love that you brought up this topic. I have a feeling we are going to go in very different directions than I thought we would, because that is something. So I teach courses, as do you. And one of the first things that I talk to my students about is not memorizing what I say, but actually turning it into something they can use. So when I do the exam, I actually did an exam with one of my groups of students last night, and they're all worried about the exam. And my exam is, I ask questions. I want it in your words. I want to know how you can apply it. Don't there's It can't be open book because there's no book to open, right? So I love that you said that. And I find that not only children these days, but people in general, we have all of this information at our fingertips, and we consume and consume and consume, but we don't ever put it to practice. So, you know, 100% children actually still have a chance to apply once they get older. But I find how this really, really impacts our society is people that believe that they cannot succeed in anything. So, for example, the area that I work in, relationships and physical health, they're like, I've tried everything. I've read this, I've read that, I've read this, I've listened to this, blah, 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 but they don't apply. They don't
Yeah.
apply what they've just learned. So, thank you for bringing that up, because that's critical. If we
I
aren't
was,
applying our knowledge.
yeah, I was very fortunate in my career early on. My first professional role with a corporate company, and I've worked in corporations for about 25 years. Was with a company in the Middle East. It was a joint venture with ExxonMobil. So you got all the systems, and at the time, ExxonMobil was the top earning company in the world. Obviously, commodity-based business, but very successful because they had a very disciplined approach. But that company, what they did, which was great, was because there was a nationalization effort, they brought in top level executive coaches. And I had the opportunity, I was a leader in the organization, to partake in this leadership development program, and it was world class. One of the coaches that we had, who is now a mentor to me, is a man by the name of Dr. David Wall. He used to be a personal coach to Richard Branson. And so, he's a pretty high caliber guy, lives in the UK, retired now, does his auto racing and yachts and things like that. So he's that kind of high performance guy. When I took his leadership course, the first thing he always talked about was writing your own book on leadership. So, you walk into the airport hotel or into the airport, you go to the bookstore. There's 100 different books on business. His philosophy is, take one thing out of a book and apply it be able to apply it. Applying all 100 concepts of a model or something is unrealistic because all we have is 24 hours in the day. And so I've really taken that as part of my philosophy with the program that I've developed, and really kind of in the consulting. And my tagline is, take what you like, throw away what you didn't like, and write your own operations manual. And this is really the critical thinking that you have to use individually to, not only understand, what you want, but hey, what are my obstacles? How do I need to act and behave? And what are the things that I need to implement to get what I want? But it really, what you've shared just really resonates with me, that we have to get that critical thinking out there, and you have to decide what makes sense for you,
Right.
especially, when we're bombarded with just all these things that, create social comparison and other, trigger other biases.
Absolutely. And I love that. I love that, make your own operations manual. That's so important, that we don't try and take somebody else's understanding and knowledge and make it our own. We need to bring in information and then keep what's congruent with us, grow, learn and grow, of course, but not all of it is going to make sense to us. Not all of it's going to be useful to us. So when we try and continue to hammer home the things that we're supposed to do, we're supposed to know, then it's just memorization, and we're just repeating
Yeah.
something that
Well,
is not going to work.
totally. And I'll give you a great example, Julie, and this is what I've learned from you. So, in conversations that you and I have had in the past, you've talked about NLP,
Mhm.
neuro linguistic programming, and
Yes.
you'll talk about different consultants that use, that kind of programming to essentially codify a certain behavior, with people. And since talking with you about that last year and learning more about this, I mean, it is pervasive in our culture, in our society. And everywhere you go, there's little subliminal messages, that are trying to control us. I mean, we've seen this from the pandemic, and I certainly don't want to get into another COVID conversation because I mean, like everyone, we're tired of this. We want to move on, but I'm really, really attuned to when, I see that. I think somebody wants to get by me here. Talk about being flexible.
Yes, Jeff is working.
Exactly.
And
At the
coffee
coffee
shop.
shop, you never know what's gonna happen, right?
Littlest hobo, remember?
Littlest
Littlest hobo.
hobo. Exactly. I mean, I do need, when I'm living in the van, I mean, I do need to go to coffee shops to kind of get my social, kind of fill. And
Right?
but I love flat whites. I mean, when I lived in Australia, I lived in Australia for 2 years. I was working in mining at the time. And I should say my sister lives in Australia as well, so it was nice to be close with family. But the Australians are crazy about their coffee. I think they talk about Melbourne being the hub for coffee, but Brisbane, where I was living, is just as serious. And so, I picked up on the flat white from Australia. And when I go to coffee shops, I'm like this Canadian coffee snob now, where I'm still looking for the perfect flat white. I found a couple places that are exceptional, but it's a pursuit of mine, a hobby.
So I don't drink coffee in general, but lately I have been really embracing the cold coffee, and I have found, and this is going to turn some people's stomachs, I have found that actually McDonald's has a really good, because you know what? Most of these places, they have like a cold coffee syrup or something. And I'm like, I just want you to brew coffee and then make it cold. I just want cold coffee. And McDonald's does that. Shout out to McDonald's. Not that they need my help. They actually serve you brewed coffee that's just cold. As so does Starbucks, but a lot of them are like, here's the mixture that's already full of sugar and crap. Like,
Yeah.
anyway. So
And the
yeah,
and the difference is McDonald's, you probably pay, $2 for that coffee, whereas at
a
Starbucks, you're
buck,
paying $5, right? Yeah.
a buck compared to, because I drink a smaller one, because I'm just wee. So a buck compared to like $4.
Yeah.
Like I'm never Starbucks. Yes, will do that for me, but I am way too cheap to continue to go to Starbucks.
Well, my problem is so this is the rebel tendency in me is I fight against convention all the time. So Um, the last place I actually go is McDonald's or Starbucks. I always search out like the mom and pop, place, the independent. I find you pay a little bit more, but I mean, I use their Wi-Fi. So even for $5
Right.
to use Wi-Fi for 2 hours, it's like,
Mhm.
okay, I have no problem paying that. So money well
Love
spent.
the little coffee shops too.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm living, as you know, but and some of you out there know, I'm living in White Rock, and White Rock doesn't actually White Rock proper has like 14,000 people, and we do not have a McDonald's or anything like that. Now we're attached to Surrey, so I could kind of hop over there. But I love the idea that White Rock itself, everything here is independent. You can't get, other than a gas station, you can't get the conventional anyways, and I love that.
Yeah.
And I'm moving to even a smaller place. Ah, I'm moving to a place that has 1,500 people in 2 weeks. So I'm
Perfect.
like,
Actually, actually, I'm looking at right now. I'm looking at micro. So Victoria's my home. I haven't spent much time there, to be honest, but it's where I want to be to do my training. I mean, just I think Victoria has some of the best all around weather in Canada.
mm,
Um, but I'm looking at micro apartments. So something
okay,
that's 200-300 square feet. I don't need a lot. I've got 5 bikes, which those are my babies. I need to find a home for them, so I'll put them on the wall. But other than that, I mean, you know how it is. I mean, but I've lived in big houses before. It's when we were married. I mean, every time you go bigger, 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 you have to fill these spaces with
hmm
things, and we're just programmed biologically. I mean, that's another thing I'm really attuned to now more is my biology. Um, why, rather than shame myself, in a certain way, well, what is your biology, kind of doing here? And I think, biologically we're designed to kind of fill the nest with things and get the
right.
nest because we want security, we want safety. That's important as well. So, but
We're
yeah,
much
micro apartment.
we're much more like animals than we allow ourselves to believe. So, for anybody out there that knows dogs, I didn't know this when I was growing up, but the kennel is actually their safe place. And the reason is if you give them a whole house to wander around in, they feel they need to protect the whole house. That causes anxiety. If you put them in a kennel when you leave, they know I just need to protect this. So obviously, you don't want to leave them there for hours and hours and hours because, dogs need to move. But it's the same thing with people. If you give them all this vast space, that's what they need to care for and protect. And it can cause anxiety, right? So we don't need these huge spaces.
Julie, this is exactly what I feel about the van. It's like a
Right.
mobile dog carrier for me.
Right.
You
Littlest
just
hobo. See how we just brought it all back
it
there?
just all comes back together. I got a buddy in Edmonton. I grew up in Edmonton. I still have 6 or 7 buddies that I grew up with that we all still chat. I mean, they love their McDonald's coffee, so they think I'm crazy for searching out $5 flat whites. But my one buddy will always play the Littlest Hobo theme song when I'm around. So
I feel the
yeah,
need to do that right now too. I'm going to Google it. Um, we'll get Brad to implement it when he puts the
perfect.
audio together, we'll get Brad
Love
to
it.
littlest
Love
hobo.
it. I'm embracing it.
That's
But you
awesome.
know what? Like living in the van, though, I mean, the key thing with I mean, people will ask me about living in the van, like how do you do it? And I park on logging roads, residential spots. Like I'll park like a Hastings Street in Vancouver. I don't care. I mean, people are more concerned about the guy in the van than the guy in the van is of them. That's the key thing you got to remember. No
Right.
one's going to come up to like a van with tinted out windows. They don't know what's going on in there. I have never had a problem in Canada sleeping, and I sleep like a baby when I'm in the van. Amazing.
We really are turning you into an animal. That's what they say. Don't worry about the bear. It's more afraid of you than you are of it. So same
Totally.
thing with Jeff.
That's right.
Jeff doesn't need to worry because you're more
That's
afraid
right.
of him than he is of you.
Exactly.
That
The,
is a
bear,
good,
the,
a
the bear
good
will give you a hug.
right. Oh, he's even got a bear on his shirt. I didn't even notice that. That's awesome. So we went way off target, which I had a feeling we would, and I love that more than I could possibly tell you. But let's kind of bring it back in because, of course, you do have valuable things to offer. I love, the premise of your business. So before we have to run away, possibly you could tell the audience, just in case. I'm sure lots of them out there are running offices, corporations, that kind of thing,
Mhm.
that they might need to work with you. So what are you offering these days?
Okay, so quick backdrop to this is when I was working in Australia, I was a health safety environment manager for a mining company. We had co-located assets all over Australia. The most regulated state in Australia, from a mining perspective, is Queensland. And so we would have compliance officers on our sites weekly. And in addition to all the other things that we had to do to demonstrate due diligence under regulation, they started asking about our mental health program. At the time, we didn't have anything to address that, but again, it wasn't a current obligation, a written obligation, or regulation. It was nice to have. The insight that I picked up from that, and this was 2018, 2019, was that mental health, what is known in industry as psychological health and safety, is going to be regulated at some point, the same way that occupational health and safety is regulated in many jurisdictions, including Canada, US, Europe, Australia. And so I've come back and I've implemented, or I've developed a program that I believe is preventative and helps companies address due diligence under psychological health and safety. Now, psychological health and safety isn't formally regulated in Canada, so you won't have compliance officers showing up giving orders, fines, citations for mental health, but there is precedent case law in Canada right now that points to companies having to do more to support individual mental health, mental wellness. Now, what's happening right now in industry is that the medical profession is picking up on it, but they're picking up on it from a dysfunctional perspective, a sickness and illness perspective. That's what the medical profession does.
Mhm.
My program goes on the whole other side of the prevention side in terms of what are the things that need to be in place to help address these before you start to get clinical levels of anxiety and depression where people start showing signs. And that's when it gets really bad. But the reality is that more people are on the other side of the paradigm and are really just trying to function better, do better. And of course, the concept is if you can function better at work, you can carry that over and function better kind of in life. It's not mutually exclusive, but we spend a lot of time at work. And so this program helps to address that, helps to bring an organization together. It does four things. It creates a mutual cohort, or a cohort for mutual aid and support within the company. It builds an accountability mechanism to build better habits. It helps people better understand their own social and emotional learning. And the last thing the program does is it helps the organization identify early warning signs for higher levels of anxiety or depression. And of course, that's very important in dangerous industries whereby people have to keep their mind on task. And so the key thing with that is that you want people showing up to work mentally and physically fit to do the job. And so it builds in, neuroscience, emotional intelligence, how you interact socially with the world. It all, it's all related, but putting that into a way that people can digest. And again, take that key thing and apply it to your life. That's the focus of the program.
Right. Thank you so much. I feel like there needs to be a mic drop now. I knew what this program was about, and yet I still felt emotional as you were describing it. I think your voice changed as you were describing it. It became much more serious, and I think that it's so important, and I'm so glad that it's going to be regulated in the future, because it's definitely not something that is even fostered in most situations now, let alone regulated. And preventative is key. As you said, the medical field doesn't do prevention, they do crisis.
Right.
So that's awesome. I
Yeah.
thank you very much for having the forethought to start this project.
Yeah. So I guess if folks are interested in my story and in this program, I've got a website, retirenegativestress.com. I'm on social media as well if you want to check me out there. I've got a podcast where I talk about my van journeys as well. People can check that out from the website. And so yeah, it's all building, but it all takes time and one step at a time.
And all that stuff is accessible on your website,
Right.
retirenegativestress.com, did you say?
That's right. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll put that in the show notes as well, just so people can click on it. And if you have any other links, they will be in the show notes as well. Thank you so very much for this conversation. I'm going to make sure that you agree to do another conversation with me, because again, there's all kinds of topics. And I'd love to see how things are going in the future with your course and, with the living in a van thing.
Yeah, no, I guess that's right. I'm starting my doctorate in September. I'm going to start putting
Sweet.
a lot more research behind it, and yeah, I'm really excited, you know, about the
So
future.
many exciting things to come.
Yeah.
Before we go, I want to ask you one last question.
Hmm.
What would the child version of you think about the you who's sitting here, right now?
It's about time, motherfucker. Can I say that, Julie? Am I allowed to say that?
Yeah, you can say whatever the hell you please. Nobody here's making rules, least of all me. That's awesome. Did you want to tell us what that's in reference to, or just drop like mic drop and leave it there?
I think for me, I mean, 48 this year, and it's just taking me a long time. My journey is it's my journey, and I'm owning it now. And part of what I'm realizing is that to get what I want in life, I have to put myself out there, and I have to do it in a way that's authentic, that represents myself. I mean, I'm the brand, and for many years, I kind of hid behind, somebody else's brand, and so everything that I do now aligns with my brand. It gives me a hell of a lot of time affluence to do what I want, and it actually aids my health. I feel I've never been in better mental or physical health in my life, and I think it's because of some of the decisions I've made in the last 5 years to get to this point. Like Steven Tyler said, you wouldn't believe how expensive it is to live or look like I'm living a cheap lifestyle.
True story. That's beautiful. I love that. Thank you for sharing everything that you've shared today. And don't forget to reach out to Jeff. His contact information will be in the show notes. But if you're driving, listening to a podcast, retirenegativestress.com. Check it out. Thank
Thanks,
you
Julie.
so much, Jeff.
Awesome. Thanks, Julie.